You're tuned in to the Stingbat Radio Network on FM 101.2 KRPG.
Welcome to Dungeon Master Diaries, a podcast about Shadowdark and other role-playing games where two GMs talk about their recent experiences at the table and hopefully give you something useful that you can take to yours. On the show today, we discuss the 5e SD Venn diagram. Hello there, sages and adventurers. My name's Jody, and with me, as always, is my good friend and GM colleague, Matt. How you doing, my friend?
Hey there, Jody. How are you?
Well, I am excited to continue to watch the ever-expanding Kickstarter, and I thought we had a chance here to share something useful with the folks. So today's episode is going to focus on the intersection and differences and similarities between Shadowdark and modern Dungeons & Dragons. So, Matt, you've actually been living in both worlds for over a year now. Why don't you take us to the table?
Indeed, Jody. I have been running quite a bit of Shadowdark over the course of the last year, actually plus now simultaneous with running a 5th edition 2014 Dungeons & Dragons. Not the new rules that just came out recently, but we're keeping with the 2014 rules for my 5th edition game. And I'm running that 5th edition game in Exandria, the critical role setting. And it's just worth noting that I'm leaning into heavily something that I'm sure we'll come back to quite a bit, which is the high fantasy elements. Couple that with all of my experience running 5th edition before that, and then juxtapose it with my time running Shadowdark for our open table and our Dolmenwood game. And what I have found is that there are some similarities and differences that I think are both genuinely pretty self-evident, that you don't need to look too hard and you can see, but I also think that there are some maybe complexities here, and maybe I can help shine a light along with you, Jody, on what those are. Now I'm going to leave it pretty vague, but got lots of examples of the way that these two games both overlap and diverge, and I'm looking forward to digging in.
All right, and dig in we shall. Let's gather around the fire, have a little chat about these two different animals, because they are indeed different, but the lineage they share is undeniable. Right at the top, Matt, before I throw you a question and we get into it, I do want to address the elephant in the room. And, you know, it's a lovely elephant, and it's even a herd of elephants coming our way. A lot of new players are coming to Shadowdark with this new latest Kickstarter. We saw this happen with the first Kickstarter. A lot of new folks coming in. So we kind of thought it might be helpful as two GMs who've played a fair amount of both systems, limiting the 2014 Dungeons & Dragons.
Right.
But I also played a lot of 3rd Ed, and I would argue there's a lot in common between 3rd Ed and 5th Ed. So when I say modern D&D, I'm going to pull from both of those sources. You've got no shortage of very current experience with 5e to pull from. And then, of course, the two of us have just sold our coins and our Stingbats over to the Arcane Library. And yeah, that kind of worked. So, but this is also, so in some level, this is a primer to new folks who are Shadowdark curious, who are familiar with 5e. And then maybe, I'm sure a lot of you are just dabbling in both worlds. So Matt, let's do like we often do here. Let's jump to the front of the line. Hot take. What is to you the core overlap of the two systems? Where do the two live together in harmony?
This is a great question, Jody. I think it would be silly to start anywhere but the humble D20, the unified mechanic of resolution. And I think the roll a D20, add a modifier, will be the thing that folks coming from 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons will note from the get-go. And the differences do start to diverge there, but I do think that while it seems on the surface to be a small thing, it's actually a pretty profound, significant similarity, because the reaching for the D20 and making a roll and adding a number, trying to hit a difficulty class is just so core to the 5th edition gameplay loop, and it's also core to the Shadowdark gameplay loop.
I'll double down on that and say that advantage and disadvantage, see what I did there, are so intuitive as well that both systems have just leveraged that. And it, Kelsey's pretty unabashed about that. Shadowdark just takes those mechanics that work really well and just starts doing something a little different. I think that the D20 point is fascinating because it's intuitive. You understand, grab the die, roll it, add something. But also, don't sleep on that. For those of us who played many moons ago, sometimes you add something and sometimes you subtract something and sometimes you roll high and sometimes you multiply. And I don't miss any of that at all. D20, add something. That's it. Moving on. It's great. It's good stuff.
Well, yeah. So, Jody, one thing I want to address here at the top is, there are some core rules differences that I don't think we're going to get into. Like, we're not going to go through the list of all of the rules FAQs. We'll put a link in the show notes to this kind of the FAQ that's up on the Discord, and the one that Kelsey did that is up on the Arcane Library website, that will have lots of answers to a wide variety of rules questions. And I think, what I want to do here, and you can steer me whatever direction you want to steer this conversation, of course, Jody, but what I have in my mind, right, is this idea of how can we kind of prime 5th edition's players in terms of their game brains for the big similarities and big changes that they're about to face. Is that kind of where your brain is?
Yeah, I think there's the bridge. More people are coming to than are going from, right? There's a lot more folks coming to Shadowdark right now than are
they're not
leaving.
We're not hemorrhaging players.
No, we don't have a lack thereof. So yeah, I think there's some obvious hey, the 5e does this and Shadowdark is either similar or different. And yeah, the D20 is the first layer of where to start here. You're not going to be out over your skis. I think another one that I want to address right off the top that they share in their Venn diagram, because I want to stay in this place of what's going to be familiar to you.
Sure.
What are you already going to know?
Sure. Got it.
Heroic storytelling. Now, some people will say, no.
Ooh, spicy take,
Jody. Grimdark survival in the dirt with mud and guts and blood and all those things in a weird order. That's what Shadowdark's about. Yes, it is. And overcoming those things is freaking heroic. So also, you've been playing a Dolmenwood game for a bit. I think we may have mentioned it before. I don't know. Would you say that is a heroic fantasy?
Look, I think heroic fantasy to me means something pretty specific, and I don't know that I necessarily would categorize Shadowdark as a heroic fantasy game. No. I do think that heroism is core to the game, overcoming challenges and doing so in a way that is heroic, and courage in the face of fear, etc. What I think is a salient difference, and I think can be turned up or down in Shadowdark much easier than it can in 5th edition, is just player power level, right? And so what I think 5th edition players will immediately recognize, is not hard to see, this is another one of those things that's very self-evident, is that Shadowdark characters are they just aren't as powerful from jump, nor are they going to seem as powerful as they level up. More on that probably later. But I think for me, the heroism of Shadowdark is different than the heroism of D&D 5th edition and its ilk in some pretty salient ways. But ultimately, they are both attempting to accomplish the overcoming of challenges, courage in the face of fear, people working together, teamwork, overcoming the threat of death. That's what I think you're trying to say, if I'm reading you correctly.
Yeah, it's the hero story,
sure,
not hero characters. And that hero character, no, we're on two different ends of the Venn diagram here. Down in the middle, though, heroic stories. Yeah, are they different kinds of heroic stories? Sometimes, not always. but sometimes definitely. And there's a leaning. Each system has a leaning. I think the way I think of it is 5e characters and modern D&D characters start off, maybe not at level 1, but from level 2 and beyond, you're pretty good to go. You're pretty tough. And anybody who played 4th ed, you're real good. At level 1, you do some things. It's impressive. It's pretty cool. So those modern D&D games, yeah, you start off as some indicators that you're going to be powerful. I want to actually just stick with the thing you just alluded to of that notion of, is it a similarity or is it a difference of Shadowdark characters as they level up? Are they in fact becoming heroic, or are they like, nah, you're just a mud farmer forever, enjoy your mud farming life?
So I hold this to be a core truth of Shadowdark, and I'm going to say it as close to the top of the ep as possible. Shadowdark is not a lethal game. Its lethality has been promulgated, I don't think incorrectly, but I think it has been framed incorrectly. Is Shadowdark more deadly than 5th edition? Yes. Is it a lethal game? No. And it's largely because once the characters hit 3rd or 4th level in Shadowdark, they actually, due to the flattened math of Shadowdark, the lower modifiers, the smaller damage coming through to your characters, you start to be pretty survivable just with a couple of levels under your belt. And I think at that point, those tiers of play that you see in 5th edition D20 fantasy and its ilk, that 1 to 5, 5 to 10, etc., you start to see a little bit of those tiers of play in Shadowdark as well. And I think this is actually one of those things that you don't see right from the get-go. Like, my characters in my 5th edition game that I'm running currently in Exandria, I have 2 level 6 characters and a level 4 character. The level 4 character is a new player that we're kind of onboarding and slowly ramping up the difficulty of playing the character.
The complexity of the character. Good call.
Exactly. So a little bit of a mixed level party there, which is a little harder to do in a 5th edition game. But then in our Shadowdark games, we have level 8 characters, or at least one level 8 character in both our Dolmenwood game and our Sunday game. Those characters are extraordinarily strong, even without their magic items. But they have a few magic items. But holy crap, they can truck out damage. We have a level 8 fighter who's trucking out damage. We have a level 8 wizard that's just casting all these crazy spells. It's awesome, but it's also like, wow, these are heroic characters, and they're not unkillable, but they're survivable.
Yeah, and that lethality point, I think, lives. It is a difference, but it's not a difference in the way people think of it. Can Shadowdark characters die? Yes. And Shadowdark characters at low levels can die pretty quickly and easily if things get away from them. But if there's a priest around, you're probably okay. The other piece is, once you get up a few levels and you have a somewhat balanced party, which is a difference point, more on that later, it's pretty tough to take out a higher level Shadowdark character, but you can. Things can spiral out of hand very quickly. We've watched 4th and 5th level characters meet untimely demises because things just got away from them. And that, I will say, is for me, if I was going to really hang my hat on, okay, what's the difference that means the most to me? Well, of the two systems, where's the difference that means the most? That's the difference. A Shadowdark character never gets to a point they can completely scoff at death. We haven't seen it yet anyway. And we've multiple 8th level characters running around, and we've seen some stuff. My 5e games and modern D&D games that I've run, from about 2nd level, really from 3rd level on, death is really not on the table. It was all I could do to make my characters think they were in danger, but if you understand the maths of modern D&D, you're not really in much risk of dying without the GM standing on your neck.
That and that's, I think, the thing for me that matters the most, is that you can make characters in Shadowdark feel mortal peril without simultaneously feeling like a jerk if you're running the game.
Yeah, and from a GMing hat, that's for me was so refreshing. Was I can genuinely be worried about my characters when I run a Shadowdark game. I have had many a moment that I'm like, oh snap, I'm afraid for them. I want them to win. I want them to live. I am trying to do the Jim Murphy lose with panache of GMing. And it just happened. I had a Minotaur charge one of my characters and splatter him against a wall. And I was like, uh-oh, this could get away from them. And then some crazy heroicness happened and they got out of it. It was dope. But I was genuinely worried about these 3 guys taking on a Minotaur. I used to have to do some janky sleight of hand stuff to make it feel as though my characters in my modern D&D games were in danger. And I secretly knew as the GM, they're not in any danger. The statistical likelihood of one of them actually dying is so small here. It's just not an issue. So for me, that difference, and I understand why people latch onto like, oh, Shadowdark's lethal. It can be, but that's at its core not the thing. And it's not as big of a jump if you're a modern D&D GM and you're coming to Shadowdark and you're worried about, man, I don't want to kill all my characters. All the same perils exist. If you outnumber them real bad, it's going to go bad. Big stompy things will stomp and hurt. But if it's a air quotes balanced encounter, you're like, this feels in the realm of reasonable. They're going to be okay.
Yeah, but I do want to say that, and this is, I think, a big blinking red light and a cautionary tale, which is that, first of all, we don't expect balanced encounters in Shadowdark. This is not something that GMs are either required or urged to do or encouraged. It is a truth and a mantra in old school Renaissance gaming that combat is a fail state. And this is one of the places where I think actually it's not so much a difference between 5th edition and Shadowdark. This is a difference between GMs. There are a number of game masters on the Shadowdark Discord channel that really enjoy combat and have combat heavy sessions. You and I are 2 GMs who enjoy combat and who aren't necessarily running sessions with the mindset that combat is a fail state.
Right.
There are game masters and parties who enjoy attempting to avoid combat at all costs. This is something that if you're using prepared materials, for instance, if you're using the Scarlet Minotaur adventure and dungeon in the Game Master Quick Start Guide, there are, specifically the Minotaur, there are monsters in there that are not going to feel balanced for characters, that will threaten the lives of characters easily. Level 1 characters for sure. And I think just for the context of this, Shadowdark is not lethal, but it is deadly, it is dangerous, and the players need to keep that in mind in a way that they don't always in 5th edition.
And I think that takes me to a point of similarity, funny enough. The way a character is going to interact with your world, you're the GM, you're laying out the world, you're setting the stakes, you're doing your NPC funny voices or not. You are at the grimy, gritty tavern or the sparkling dancing lights in the sky tavern, whatever it may be, that back and forth is the same. If you are watching actual plays online and you're watching Brendan Lee Mulligan or Matt Mercer or pick your favorite online GM, if you've grabbed Shadowdark's rules, I want you to watch a roleplay session, not a combat session, but a roleplay session where they're just talking through some stuff, doing their voices, being the cool thing that it is to watch, professional voice actors and comedians play D&D. I think you would be shocked how rarely the modern D&D style rules are really needed there at all. And there's no difference in Shadowdark. It's just the same. All of those soft interactions, those characterful interactions, those deduction scenes, all of that stuff is largely the same. If it's NPCs and we're interacting with the world and we're meeting the town and we're out doing our explorations. There's some differences on the exploration piece. More on that in a moment. But the core loop of playing, of we are making imaginary people and they are imagining the world richly and complexly, that should look and feel basically the same.
100%. And I think actually, and this comes down to preference. So I just want to say that I personally, I think you would sign on to this as well, Jody. I think I prefer Shadowdark because there's even fewer potential places where the game is going to get involved in those situations where, there aren't really persuasion, intimidation. There aren't these skill checks that you kind of as a GM go like, well, should I have them make this skill check? Should I have them roll? In Shadowdark, you kind of strip away all of the stuff that sometimes felt to me personally like it got in the way of those extended role-playing scenes or whatever. And instead, what you add in is a sense of freedom in those moments. And, if you're in the dungeon and you have a torch lit and you have the hour-long torch timer going, that can feel oppressive. I think there have been some people who have come to the Discord and have expressed that their players didn't like feeling like they couldn't role-play because of the hour-long torch timer. I understand that, and I think that there's some interesting conversation to be had there about potential solutions. But other than that, there's no other impediments to doing what you say.
Yeah, the NPC candid roleplay moments are just as rich in both settings. And in fact, if you like that sort of thing, if your table's real rich in that, again, what we see in actual plays, I'd argue that you might find a little more satisfaction in Shadowdark, funny enough. Matt, I want to prompt you to a very specific example here, actually, because we just had a scene in Dolmenwood where our lowly little party, also including an 8th level sorcerer, mage, wizard, who's really punching above the rest of our pay grade, is we met somebody really important in a high fantasy moment. We met an elven duke riding atop their giant, for lack of better terms, battle cat.
Yeah.
It was crazy. And I want you to talk about how that scene went down as we played it out.
Mm-hmm.
Spoilers, we all kind of collectively pooped our pants with fear. That was a choice we made as characters.
Yeah.
And then we were validated for the one of the 6 of us who elected not to do that. We went, see, that was a bad choice and you're dumb. But how that scene would have been different to kind of accentuate this point of, while the discussion loop is the same, you said there might be some mechanical things in a modern D&D setting that would kind of get in the way of that scene.
Yeah.
And I think that scene really highlights this Venn diagram.
Yeah, so I'm not going to give the full backstory here, but the which would take a while. But the long and short of it is we have this 8th level wizard who left her fairy court to pursue mortal realm stuff. And she has, since the beginning of the campaign, referred to herself as the world's greatest sorcerer, and has now arrived at level 8 and is pretty darn powerful. And so we've been playing. We've kind of had a couple of moments early in the campaign of this fairy court kind of coming up. But eventually, you guys were back in that fairy court's kind of mortal domain locale. You were around where that fairy domain has some mortal realm presence. Well, I had a little random encounter table that I had drawn up, and one of the encounters was that Duke Mefleur shows up. This like an elven fae, essentially kind of like a deity, right? A demigod, essentially, shows up and attempts to recruit the world's greatest sorceress back into his wild hunt. He is known for going on these great hunts for like mysterious and wonderful beasts, and he's like all pissed off that all of his elven courtiers and other elven rangers are unable to catch these fae beasts. So he shows up, and a level 8 character goes completely silent. At no point did the character ever think about throwing a fireball at the dude or trying to hold person or whatever. the party collectively kind of clenches up. And at one point I had to reinforce once again the capriciousness of this particular Fae court and this particular Fae demigod. He just like reaches back, takes out a sword, and cuts off the head of one of the two servants that he had with him. No attack roll, just does it. Boom, done. And then goes back to chatting. Throughout this conversation, the party just kind of acquiesced and went along with it and answered the questions, and we had a back and forth, but at no point was a sword drawn, was a spell cast. The only time was that our one of our wizards, who's a mossling, a little moss kind of moss dwarf kind of a dude, kind of mouthed off a little bit, and the fairy lord shot him with a bow and sent him to 0 hit points, and then just was like, okay, anyways, as we were talking about. And literally our priest got up out of his seat and walked over, because I just kept going and was like, I don't really care about this guy. Walked over and had like a private conversation, rolled some dice, and had to revive him from 0 hit points.
Yeah, and I mean, so I'm lucky enough to also be playing an elf in this scene, and I like watched this, sitting to my right, my friend's character just get dropped, and I like look at the priest, and he's like, yeah, I got it. And I'm like, hey, could you come patch him up? Again, speaking to that not lethal, like I wasn't worried that our mossling wizard was dead. I was like, dude should get up. I mean, we've got a divine caster here, should get him up. Party balance, it's a good thing. And I'm gonna try and help mitigate here, because another elf who isn't walking around telling everybody how amazing he is, a little more demure, or also 5 levels lower. So nowhere, I got nothing to lose. I suck. We're clear about my place and all this.
But that wouldn't have worked in 5th edition that way. I kind of want to get your take on this as a player, because from my perspective, there's 2 reasons. Number one, I would have had to have like a detailed stat block for the fairy lord. 5th edition, mechanics heavy, and the players, because this dude is being a jerk and is being capricious, the players might feel empowered, especially if they were equivalent level, sort of an equivalent power level. They might have felt like they could attack this guy and engage in combat as a resolution, right? That would not have ended well for you guys. And what was interesting is that everyone around the table in our Shadowdark game knew that unequivocally. And I didn't have to roll a die. I didn't have to say he adds 500 to his attack roll. You all just understood. I didn't really roll an attack roll to shoot the mossling wizard with an arrow. I just kind of rolled some damage, and no one blinked, because it's very clear in Shadowdark that NPCs don't play by the same rules, and monsters don't play the same rules as players, and they can be much higher level than the players can be. And that's like by design. And I just think in like a 5th edition game, it would have felt unsporting in a way that actually would have detracted from the narrative moment. And I think you could also read this, if you were being less charitable, as like me kind of taking over a scene as a GM. But like I and you can tell me if I'm wrong, I thought that there was buy-in from everybody around the table in a way that I have just never been able to really get out of a 5th edition game.
And I think that's the key piece, is that discrepancy of power level, because monsters just work differently. But you weren't deleting any of our abilities. You weren't saying no to any of our stats or our skills. A modern D&D character has specific things on their sheet that they can do. And this is one of those core mantras that if you're coming to Shadowdark, you will have seen, if you've looked around at all, the answer is not on your character sheet. Our characters interacting with this Fey Prince, there's no answers on our character sheet. Even our very powerful high-level elven wizard, yeah, she's got spells. I don't know if they're going to work. And a lot of them do level cap because of the really clever way that the deep dive on some of the just nope out of things spells in Shadowdark max out. I don't think any of us, if you had said, this is a level 20 monster. Okay. Yep. Seems right. So the fantasy moment fit the mechanics, And there weren't any really mechanics to step on. Whereas again, in a 5e session, you would have had to step on mechanics. And I know as a player, I would have been going, and this is one of those big differences. Well, can I do an insight check to see if this guy's really as sure as he is? Why is he so grumpy? Can I know why he's grumpy? And that's all removed. So it's just the information you have at hand. And that does put some onus on the GM of you have to be forthcoming with that information. You know, and you and I have talked a lot about that. And in these high level scenes, that discussion around the humble little skill box on a modern D&D sheet. And this is where the third comes in. Is it's been there since third edition of, you know, acrobatics and insight and perception.
Yeah. I'm of two minds. I love skill-based games. I love Call of Cthulhu to kind of call out the not elephant, the tentacle monster in the room. But I love skill-based games. What I think is interesting about D&D 5th edition in comparison to Shadowdark, and the hard part and I have a point of comparison here that I want to use. I onboarded my sister from Old School Essentials to 5th edition. And one of the things that has been kind of interesting is to attempt to explain, and this it hasn't been hard, it's just been interesting, was attempting to explain what a perception check, an insight check, an investigation check, what those specific kinds of skills, what they actually do. Because in an Old School Essentials game or in a Shadowdark game, you would say, I'd like to go investigate underneath the bed. And if there's something underneath the bed, you would find it. In a 5th edition game, there is oftentimes a kind of gray area between should I make them roll an investigation check or should I not? And this is actually, I just want to point this out as well. There's some confusion for players coming from old school games to 5th edition and then probably from 5th edition to old school games in terms of where did my perception check go or what is this perception check that just appeared on my sheet? There's also some confusion for me as a GM, because I game master both of these two games, and sometimes I don't know in a 5th edition game when to roll a perception check because I'm so used to not doing it in Shadowdark. And so I actually think that those are kind of the points of friction that are probably going to come up the most, because players are going to think, well, are you telling me everything I can see? Can I make a perception check to see if I can see? No, I'm telling you everything you can see, and I'm being your eyes and ears and nose and all of your senses in the world. And if you just ask me questions, that's how you figure out more about the world. And so the skills, I don't think that they're a crutch. I like skills in games. The problem is those skills that are gray area skills, those are the ones that I've seen trip players up the most when they disappear from the sheet.
None of us were upset that you didn't make the Elven Prince make an intimidation roll.
Yeah.
Right? Like, no, dude just is being intimidating. And we didn't have to roll some kind of courage test or save or whatever. It just, it took those die rolls out. And that's one of those, again, the things you're going to hear a lot are don't ask for die rolls. Unless it's really essential, don't ask for a die roll. And
the filler, don't ask for filler rolls, right?
Is often how it's phrased. Yeah. This is the one I'm going to push back on.
Oh, I knew we were going to get here, Jody.
Yeah, we were. I want my soapbox.
Go off, King.
All right. So you're not going to call for what are referred to as filler rolls, and I don't even think of them that way. I am entering an investigation, as you described. I've entered the room, and wait, I see everything. I want to make an investigation check. I want to do this. And I, as a Shadowdark GM, go, well, what would you like to go look at? Where are you checking? And then I go, okay, for this round, you're going to go check under the desk and all around the desk. Cool. Bob, where are you going? Oh, I'm going to go check the fireplace. Cool. Sarah, where are you going? Oh, I'm definitely going to go guard the door and make sure nobody's sneaking up on us. Cool. Let's resolve all that. In a modern D&D game, it would be, I roll an investigation check, what's in the room, clonk, and you move on. It doesn't have to be that way, but that's largely how it's usually handled.
That's certainly one of the more kind of I think it's definitely a pejorative. It's definitely kind of a negative framing, but unfortunately that's what not skill based, but that's what skills can do in a D&D 5th edition game.
They can. But what they also can do, and this is funny enough, when I was coming back from 3rd edition, and with no malice, I kind of skipped 4th edition. Had a young kid at that time. We played the board games of 4th ed, and they were great.
I love the 4th edition apology, Jody. Good on you.
Hey, I never played it. I don't have a vote. So 5th, I was coming back and I was learning, and somebody out there was talking about graduated roles. And if you listen to the show before, you've heard this rant before of you don't have to make every roll as a binary roll. There can be degrees of success. So if you are comfortable as a GM, and you've heard this, don't call for filler rolls, and you're like, oh, well, but I like calling for rolls. It's part of how I move around the table, and that is how I use it. It's my mechanic of moving around the table is calling for those air quotes filler rolls, but I just treat them as degrees of success rolls. Now, could I just say you've looked at the desk and therefore you find everything that's possibly in the desk and every secret chamber and everything? I could do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. You'd have a wonderful game played that way. My reason for why I don't do that, and I do call for the dice rolls, takes us to another difference that I think is pretty pronounced, and it's niche protection of classes.
Yeah.
My love of air quotes filler rolls of saying, hey, you want to check the desk? Hey, make an intelligence check, and the higher you get, the more I'll tell you about that. Oh, you want to go guard the hall? Tell you what, make a wisdom check, aka perception check, and check those vibes. See how it's going. Oh, you want to go check the chimney? Okay, you make an intelligence check, an investigation check. The better you do, the more I'm going to tell you. Now, anything that's obvious, I would reveal. But what if one of those characters at the desk or at the chimney were a thief? They're going to get a lot no matter what. And I might go, don't bother rolling. I'm just going to tell you. Literally did that in the last game I ran. Said, oh, you want to go look at this door? Yeah, don't bother rolling. Here's everything you find. There is a lever, a secret lever on this. What does the lever do? Now I'm going to ask you to make a roll. You can tell this is what it's interacting with. Let's see if you can fully source it out. And that niche protection of telling the thief, we have an old episode where we talked about thieves. We need to talk about them again. They're really involved class. But that niche protection is so essential to Shadowdark in a way that I think is really exciting and feels familiar once you see the mirror of it. If you're a modern D&D player, you get to be a hero because you have cool abilities, and that's dope. Those abilities are still kind of secretly there. They're just now called fighter. They're now called wizard. They're now called priest.
Totally.
They're now called thief.
Right.
And they're just implied. You just do it.
I think one thing I want to say is that I think the place where Shadowdark doesn't answer questions, or how do I want to phrase this? I don't know if this was something you wanted to get into a little later, but that scene that you just set up, right? I mean, like investigating the desk. I think what I want to very, very sort of clearly point out is that every GM is going to have to figure out how detailed they want to be in what is sometimes referred to as fiction first adjudication, meaning that if a player says, I want to go up to the desk and I want to investigate it, that's one thing. If they say, I want to go up to the desk and I want to, is there a drawer on the desk? Yeah, there's a drawer on the desk. Can I take that drawer and can I just like lightly pull on it to see if there's a catch, or if like there's something, if I might like be pulling on something that feels like a trap. That's different than I want to investigate the desk. And in Shadowdark, you need to be prepared to adjudicate both of those situations, either by asking the person who says, I investigate the desk for more information about how they investigate and interact with the fiction of the world, with the desk in this case, or for the person who's already given you a lot of detail with being able to articulate what they experience. And I think that that's what the investigation role in D&D 5th edition is designed to kind of bridge, right? It's designed to, I'm going to go over to the desk and I'm going to investigate the desk. Roll an investigation check. While you're investigating the desk, you find that there is, in fact, a catch, and it feels like there's something up with this particular drawer. Now, there's degrees of ways to adjudicate stuff in 5e, just like there is in Shadowdark. But I think in Shadowdark, what I want to center us on is like the fiction first, and that goes along with your class niche protection, right? Is if in the world and in the sort of fiction of the game that you're running, it makes sense for the thief to be able to pick the lock because they're not under any time pressure. They have a lock pick in their pocket, as it says in their class description, and they are a thief. They have the skills necessary to do it. They don't need to roll unless it's a really nice lock or something, or maybe if there's extraneous circumstances. But like, they have time, they have the skills necessary, and they have the tools, right? Time, tools, training. Those are the three things that I usually use to determine whether or not a roll needs to be made in the fiction of the world. And that gets at the niche protection. It gets at kind of what we're talking about with the desk.
Speaking of that roll, here's a wonderful thing. If you are a modern D&D player and you have been able to internalize what the D20 roll spectrum is for combat and what the D20 roll resolution spectrum is for ability score checks, and what the D20 roll resolution system is for saving throws, and all three of those separate math systems, and they are separate math systems.
They're all different.
Live comfortably in your head. I am duly impressed, and no wonder you love modern D&D. Those are really cool, nuanced systems that you can do a lot with. The same argument for you old schoolers snubbing your nose right now, it's the same argument you're going to make for THAC0, so enjoy that. Shadowdark, on the other hand, if you don't enjoy those systems, and somebody right now is speaking who didn't enjoy the realization that those are three entirely separate systems: combat, skill checks, and saving throws. Shadowdark doesn't do that. There are 4 categories of success: easy, normal, hard, and extreme. And that's it for everything. There's AC. I mean, there's AC that happens on
spellcasting
skills.
rolls, which have their tiers.
But they still live
right
kind of in those. Hey, tier 5 spells are hard to cast. Ta-da! I mean, it's really, the flat math is so essential, and it speeds up play. Speed of play is an elephant in the room. That's, hey, you want to know what's different? You're going to whip around the table real quick. A 5-room dungeon is not an evening of play for a Shadowdark game. No. Even for me, who plays pretty darn slow.
Yeah, speaking of whipping around the room or whipping around the table, Shadowdark uses an always-on initiative, which is described in the core rules and is something that I think actually trips a lot of people up when they first get to the game, because it feels in the rules as if it is prescriptive. But in reality, there's quite a bit of flexibility in the quote-unquote always-on initiative system, and the core tenet of it is everyone should be able to do something each and every crawling round, or really each and every round in general, because rounds are detached from time. The torch timer is an hour long, but it doesn't have any real interfacing with the rounds of the game. There's some rules that kind of overlap, but for the purposes of this discussion, I think it's important to understand that like there's a much more codified way of moving through the game, especially in a dungeon. This is what I notice every time I run a dungeon in D&D 5e is I have no idea how much time has gone by, because there's no real round structure built into the rules of the game. It's actually quite strange. And even if there are rules built into the game, I don't know that anyone really plays with them in actual plays or in any of the games that I've played in, run, or played in. So that's one of the things that, as far as getting around the table and getting through content quickly, the idea that everyone can do something each round, and that no rounds are wasted, but everyone gets to act. It keeps the table engaged in a way that I honestly don't ever have a method of keeping. I just can't keep 6 players engaged in a D&D 5th edition game. It's just not possible during combat, no less during just like a regular, kind of conversation or whatever, or a scene in general. And with an always-on initiative kind of framework, using freeform kind of mode is how we usually play. It just gives a lot more structure to the game that allows you to get through things quickly.
Yeah, and it's a powerful tool, and I want to give you some really direct credit here. When we were playing a lot of 5th edition 2014, you ran a pirate nautical themed Mind Flare campaign. Super dope. Ended up being a great time. This was year 2 of our now 4-year standing large play group that gets together basically every 2 weeks. Now the Dolmenwood crew. You worked really hard. You were asking me for feedback at that time of like, hey, what should I be working on? And I kept giving you the kind of the same feedback of like, dude, we got to get through rounds faster. We got to get through rounds faster. And you got really good at it. Like you got good at moving us around from round to round to round to round and getting around a table, both in combat and outside of combat. The difference between how air quotes quick you were able to get through things by comparative standards. I mean, I watch actual plays where they're trying to keep it engaging and entertaining, and we went faster than that. And it's no contest compared to our games now. Like, it's just no contest. Like, Shadowdark, you get through so much content so quickly in combat and out of combat. And I think that's a really astute observation that always-on initiative, just giving a structure of how do you move through a turn, is spot on. Okay, are you good and warmed up on this topic?
Oh my God. I mean, I would hope so.
Okay, because I'm going to give you what I think is the hardest question.
Oh boy.
We got a Venn diagram.
Yep.
One side you got Shadowdark. The other side you have modern Dungeons and Dragons. There's some overlap.
Mm-hmm.
The concept of, there are the pillars of roleplay, fantasy roleplay, right? There's role-playing. There's combat. There's exploration.
Yeah.
Where does exploration live on the Venn diagram?
In terms of like rules or experiential. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So exploration, there are two kinds of exploration for me. There's exploration in terms of like exploring a dungeon and exploring an enclosed space. And then there's overland exploration in an open setting. Okay. Those are two very different things. Enclosed space, open space. I think open space exploration and travel is hyper table dependent and depending on what the purpose of the campaign and the purpose of the game is. I think that Shadowdark and D&D 5th edition actually do it better in one or the other situation. I think D&D 5e probably does it better if you're just going from point to point and there's no real purpose to exploration. You're not counting rations, etc. Like D&D 5e just the vibe matches that better. I think if you're doing exploration of enclosed spaces, Shadowdark does it better 9 times out of 10. And it's because of that always-on initiative, or it's because of that, like, everybody gets a turn. And exploration in general, I think, for me, gets interrupted by die rolls. I like exploration to be revelatory in a conversation rather than constantly having to roll perception, investigation, and really just those two checks or maybe some saving throws and whatever. But I find myself not missing at all the exploration mechanics that are in 5th edition. Is that what you were looking for? Or
no,
okay.
100%.
Okay.
And it tied to exploration is the notion of discovery.
Yeah.
Now, one of the pillars of advice that is valid for modern D&D is do not gate anything that is necessary to be discovered behind a die roll. So to your point of, man, like I just don't miss those die rolls at all when I'm doing exploration, is so valid because it's literally one of the like, hey, caution, young GMs, look out for this. And Shadowdark tells you the opposite. No, you should already be preemptively telling them everything they need to know. Just let them have it. Drink from the fire hose of information. You said to me a while back, actually, of like, I've actively been trying to tell you guys too much, and I haven't got there yet.
Yeah,
I mean, you also have the luxury of Dolmenwood and Gavin Norman writing a lot. Dude's prolific.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm going to rattle off a couple of things that I think are kind of core around this. Number one is that time, training, and tools is that ability to skip a die roll and make sure that the players can get to that content that they want to explore and discover. Huge. Second thing is niche protection and allowing wizards to discover wizardy stuff creates moments of joy and make sure that you don't have, the barbarian rolling an intelligence check and knowing about the ancient symbols, and then the wizard rolls an intelligence check and doesn't understand. Right? This will not happen because the only person in the party who can really understand the runes, at least, certainly at level 1 prior to any character development at all, is the wizard, right? And that's awesome. The ability for a class choice to matter. The third thing I want to say is that I think what happens in Shadowdark, I'm going to kind of foist something in here, is I'm going to stay on the wizard. Even if you lose your class's core abilities, if you're the wizard, if you roll a bunch of failed spell checks, right? You fail on all of your spells. That for sure sucks. However, it does not make you useless. You still have lots of things that you could be doing. Are you less effective? For sure. Is it less fun to play a wizard without spells than a wizard with spells? Yes. Is it the wildly is it as bad as it looks on your sheet? No. So those are the three things when we're talking about exploration. Like exploration, the answers aren't on your sheet. They're how you interact with the world. And when you do that in Shadowdark, I just think it creates this back and forth of question and answer and engaging with the world that, for me, as you can no doubt tell because I'm getting very exercised about this, that's what really does it for me. But I still think that exploration is oftentimes too vague of a word when we're talking about like the actual fundamental pillar of the game, because it's hard to define what it actually is. But for me, it's moments of joy, of revelation.
And I think that's what we all want is, as we are setting off with the ring across the beaten paths of the Middle Earth, we want to find Weathertop and go up there and see what's up there.
Yes.
And oh my gosh, these wraiths attacked us at the top, and that was so cool. And we had that discovery, and then et cetera, of walking montages. It's funny. I think that signposting for the two different systems, I think both really want you to do some exploration. But again, what kind of exploration are we talking about? And when you look at Shadowdark, there are codified rules at the most simple right there on your character sheet about how many rations do you have, how many torches do you have, and how often those just aren't conversations for a modern D&D game. It's just not an appropriate conversation. Could you have those? Do you have those in your gear slots? Sure. But man,
okay. How quickly does gear not become relevant?
Right. And it's tonally different.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of those tone pieces that if you've heard all the hype about Shadowdark, rightly so, and you are coming over to try it out, the stuff in your backpack matters, which is actually why I bristle a little bit when people are like, the answer is not on the character sheet. I'm like, oh, go look in your backpack. There might be answers there. The answer is not that you can fly or see in the dark or that you have, some ancestral affinity with whatever. It's not those. But you've got a backpack full of stuff and you're actually going to use it. And the implications around exploration are so different when it becomes what's in my backpack than the modern D&D take of why am I going there?
Yeah.
And then once I'm there, can I find what I'm looking for? Both of them do. Now that I'm here, can I find what I'm looking for? Both of them do that very similarly. That's a big overlap on the Venn diagram. But the why am I going and how am I going to get there couldn't be more different. So that's kind of why I wanted to take some time with that question. And then, let's end with that because again, it was all three. It's in all three spots on this Venn diagram. So let's hear from a sponsor, come back and see what we can give you to take away from this chat.
Dungeon Master Diaries is brought to you by Hench Recruiter, the smartest way to fire. Finding good hirelings and retainers is hard these days. You never know who's going to show up, and more importantly, if they'll be sober. Well, Hench Recruiter has you covered. You can confidently find torchbearers and trap finders from among thousands of competitive resumes. If you've been wondering whether you should be holding a torch or a shield lately, there's probably a sign that you could use a little help on your next delve. Jody, you used Hench Recruiter to find a hireling recently. Why don't you tell us about your experience using this excellent service?
I used to struggle with, it's a bastard sword, right? And then a shield would be nice, but God's damned, it's dark down here. And then I hired Sparky and everything changed. That halfling carries a torch like nobody's business, right at eye level, right where you need him, right where you don't. All the support I could have asked for. And I'll be honest, my meals have never tasted better with that little guy around.
You too could have the experience of hiring a highly qualified, highly trained henchman or retainer when you sign up for Hench Recruiter. And if you do so, Hench Recruiter will post signage around your town of choosing. And most parties end up finding a match within just one day. Exploring dungeons and looking for treasure is only getting more complicated and more competitive these days. If you want to find the most valuable treasures, you need to be competitive in this new era of crawling. So use the code DMD when you sign up to take 20% off your first town posting. Hench Recruiter, the smartest way to fire.
All right, friends, let's bring this topic into the light at last. Matt, you kicked this one off with your tales and exploits from two different games, or at least obliquely mentioning them. Start us off. What's your takeaway from this chat?
All right, so my first takeaway is actually just a piece of advice. I highly recommend folks who are new to Shadowdark go and check in the show notes. There is a link to a thread on the Shadowdark Discord page that is titled Common Shadowdark RPG Rules Questions. In that thread, you can find both a link to the Shadowdark RPG Rules FAQ on the Arcane Library website. Additionally, you can find a list of rulings and FAQs that are significant departures from 5th edition in some places, or just really good things to keep in mind. Things like you don't add your stat modifiers to weapon damage rolls, and the con modifier is only added to hit points at first level. Or the fact that wizards can keep casting spells as long as they succeed on their spell casting rolls. Stuff like that either has been asked a lot by new players and new GMs, or stuff that's different than 5th edition, which is where a lot of people are coming from.
And on those lines, if you are coming from 5th edition, that's awesome. Pathfinder, rad. 3rd edition, or 3.5, or whatever. That's awesome. Those are great systems, and they do some really specific things well. And they're places I want to go and play those games. Shadowdark does something actually noticeably different, and hopefully we're able to highlight some of that today. So I think both are dope, but they do different things.
Yeah, and I think I just want to say for the record that I prefer Shadowdark as a system. I love running 5e. I love running, and again, just to be very clear, this is the 2014 edition of 5th edition D&D. I love running it because everyone that is playing in that game understands that we need to lean in to what D&D 5th edition is for, and that is heroic fantasy. And when we're doing that, the game sings. And when I try and start making it do what Shadowdark is good at, or I try and make it into the game that Shadowdark wants to be, it doesn't work. And that's my fault, not 5th edition's fault.
I'm going to close this out with this. If you're a GM, what is it that you like about fantasy roleplay? Is it that high fantasy, big adventures, world-changing events, and those are the stories that really speak to your heart and you want to tell? Hey, then there's a lot of great systems for that. If you, like me, like adventurers to have dirt on their hands in a rugged frontier world where that last bit of bread in their backpack might be the difference between exhaustion and making it safely back home, if that's a story you like, Shadowdark's a place for you. They're not exclusive to each other, but understand what you like and then leverage that through the system you're playing. And I think you're going to have a lot of fun with any one of them. All right, friends, as the torchlight grows dim, we hope you're able to find something useful in our discussion today that you could take into one of your future games. If you have any questions or unique experiences from your table that you'd like us to discuss in a future episode, head on over to the Dungeon Master Diaries thread on the Shadowdark Discord channel. Look for links to any materials we reference, like the ones Matt just talked about, in the show notes, and you can check them out there and get links and stuff. If you'd like to reach out to us directly, you can find Jody on the Shadowdark Facebook page once in a while under the handle Pezman, and you can message Matt via Discord using the handle SCMatt. Until next time, later, nerds!
Dungeon Master Diaries is a production of the Stingbat Radio Network. It is produced by Jody Kropholler and edited by Matt Bruner. Our intro and outro music is composed by Christian Schuster. Dungeon Master Diaries is an independent production and is not affiliated with the Arcane Library, LLC. Shadowdark RPG is a product of the Arcane Library, copyright 2023.